it going? I hope you're gonna have a great night tonight and the wonderful October year of 2025. You can barely see me. Let me turn on the lights. That's better. That's much better. And all right, like I said, how y'all doing? How y'all been? Hope you're going to something spooky tonight. I don't know what I'm going as, honestly. I don't feel like dressing up. Not that I'm thinking I'm old enough or no, I love Halloween. I just didn't feel like dressing up tonight. Anyway, let's get down to business, alright? Today, we are reading a story called Thank You for Recycling. It is by the poster Saving Cut 3... Hold on. Yeah, Savings Cut 3465. I don't know if this is his first work or not. I haven't really read much into it, but it seemed pretty interesting. And I hope it's good for, the spooky season. Anyway, I've been brushing my hair back. I just got out of the shower. But, like always, all the links are in the descriptions. The author, Tyrdalin, the guy that made the outro I use, intro and outro, and my Discord channel that y'all can join. And I want y'all to just stories I could read. It could be your own, could be somebody else's. Just leave it down in the comments below, and I'll look it up on the subreddit. So, all right, let's get into the spooky, huh? Chlorine, stomach bile, and a hint of something sweet hangs in the air of the sanitized room. Richard sticks to the rough polyester sheet with a cold sweat. His son, Kevin, stands by his side, cupping his bony I think he misspelled bony hand. Shrill mechanical beeps, like grains of sand, count him down. Beep, 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 beep. The elderly doctor looms behind the family. A broken halo of white tufted hair outlines his balding head. Richard's weary gaze shifts to meet the glint of green in his son's auburn iris, snapping him back to the long night spent lost in his wife's jade eyes. How she would rouse him back to work whenever he found himself entranced in her gaze. They'd been working on a novel, Susan illustrating with Richard doing most of the writing. So young and ambitious, they poured themselves into its creation, intoxicated on dreams of success and validation. Before the sobering hand of life dashed those dreams, it was their senior year in college, about halfway through the story, when Suzanne got pregnant. Life seemed to pass on so much quicker. Life seemed to pass on so much quicker after that. Though their love remained strong, the day-to-day stress left so little time for silly dreams. Richard thought back to their wedding day, standing at the altar as he watched Suzanne approach. She was so beautiful, a goddess cloaked in white. He watched as the veil lifted over her face, her radiant eyes piercing his soul as they met. Richard became an accountant. It was a job he quickly grew to hate, but it allowed him to provide his family with a comfortable living while Suzanne took care of their son. Long hours spent poring over mind-numbing calculations every day, years going by in a blur. When their son graduated, they decided to take up their story they'd left off so long ago, but Suzanne found that she couldn't quite steady her hand as well as she could when she was younger. Initially, she thought it was just a bit of rust and that being back in practice it would improve. It did not improve. At 40 years old, Suzanne was diagnosed with a particularly aggressive, early-onset form of Parkinson's disease. The doctor told her she would keep doing her art as long as she could, that it would slow the progression of the disease. She spent most of her days locked in her office painting, too embarrassed to show anyone. Richard cared for her for the years following, with that role increasing as his own capabilities decreased. He listened to the last strain of words that escaped her lips, her breath heavy, punctuating pained syllables. It was the first full sentence she had said in a long time. He could see how exhausting it was for her. I love you, before the disease claimed her voice as it did her body. He never wished this burden away. Oh my gosh. He never wished this burden away, though he lived for the moments when her eyes would open and he could stare into the same pools of emerald for a fleeting moment to feel the same trance she'd placed on him every day since they'd met. He thought of her lying on her deathbed, his hands clasping hers as he watched her vitals, the last part of her still reflecting life, dwindling away. Kevin and his young grandson stood behind him, with tears in their eyes. "Don't worry," She's just going home, Richard said with a single tear streaming down his cheek. When he'd gotten home from the hospital, he decided to look through her office. Walking in, he saw their books sitting prominently on her desk. Another wave of depression hit him with the realization that it had never been completed. Digging through her storage, he finds a single painting. It changes in quality throughout, telling him that it was made over years. The backdrop was black, the crow standing at the bottom center, his wings spread with a colorful arrangement of flower petals clamped in his beak. The crow looked to have been done earliest, but the petals in its beak had appeared to have been an afterthought. Rough, irregular shards of color, a steady stream of petals continued to fall down to the crow, growing rougher and more simple as they move up. The center top of the painting is an amalgam of colorful petals, their outlines blending together, forming a massive, gaping floral vagina. Wow. What? Just hit me over the head with that. Alright. Oh, that was so out of nowhere. Richard began to weep as he stared at the painting, a visual representation of his wife's decline. It felt like walking, though, the last 10 years again in a flash. I think he put... It says though, but I think he meant to put through. It felt like walking through the last 10 years again in a flash. Yeah. Richard's diagnosis had come as a shock to the family, yet Richard feels no fear. Despite his family pleas, he denies treatment, eagerly awaiting the reunion to come. Part of him feels he'd wiled the deviant cell to spread through his body. The tempo between the beats of the machine slows. A smile forms across Richard's face. He closes his eyes and begins to drift off. The cool embrace of death creeps up his body, warming its way behind his eyelids before his consciousness fades to black. The painful siren of death falls upon the ears of the bereaved. The doctor suddenly darts across the room, too swift a movement for the octogenarian, his white reaper coat ethereally blowing behind him. The family's composure bursts like an overflown dam. Time of death, 8:37 a.m., March 19th, says the doctor robotically before leaving the room. Kevin embraces his son tightly, tears streaming down their cheeks. On the ride home, once their tears have dried, Kevin Jr. breaks the silence and asks his dad, "Hey, Dad, where do you think Hey, Dad, where do you think we go when we die?" Kevin isn't sure what to say that. "Well, you know Grandpa was Baptist, and your mom, of course, is Jewish. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions on that. But what do you think, Dad?" Kevin considered it for a moment. "I think we go home, son." Richard awakens from what felt like the deepest sleep of his life. He tries opening his bleary lids, but nothing changes. He remains in the same pitch darkness. He feels a strong wind cutting into him, but when he tries turning away, it seems to adjust accordingly. Trying desperately to catch his breath, his head aching, his heart beating rapidly, the atmosphere feels salty, moist, and shallow. There are smells of sweat, musty earth, and rotten eggs. He tries to scream. It devolves into a fit of frantic hacking. An echoing orchestra of moans comes to him from a distance below, pierced through by shrieks and wails that stifle themselves just as they start. The walls surrounding him throb, surrounding like a massive heart pumping blood by the ton. A hail of pin drops falls onto his back, sending him reeling in pain and letting out a deep cry as he feels his skin agonizingly molt. Ugh. Richard covers his body, curling into the fetal position. His hands move to his back, a futile attempt to soothe his burns. He feels the damaged skin, gooey and slimy, moving unnaturally under his hand. Abruptly pulling his grip away, he feels stringy, rotten skin tear off with his palm, exposing a patch of raw nerves underneath. Oh, he's literally rotting away. That's awful. What a sick visual, though. Alright, let's see. The sounds of pain continue to amplify as he descends, slowly piercing through his own breathy sobs. The cries reach their crescendo as his body collides. Something snaps under his weight and stabs sharply into his rear. A shriek lets out below him. Raising himself to pull the shard from his backside, Richard's instinct to apologize is interrupted by the continuous rain of flesh from above. Something solid clashes against his head before he feels groping hands pull his ankles down to a claustrophobic scrambling rave. Richard tries to pull himself up, though the throng of scrambling bodies, all contorting painfully, just peak, their heads above for a desperate puff of thin air. He tries to push off a large pair of shoulders in front of him, but lets himself fall when he feels the tender, slimy meat sliding off bone. Richard feels sweaty hands groping at his shoulders, neck, and hair, pulling him deeper into the chaotic knots. His arms and antennal. Is that am I looking at that right? His arms antennal above the mass. He feels hands clutch his wrist, pulling them back into the mob. Richard becomes stuck in the entanglement, his arms extended at his side like a mock crucifixion with his feet pinned together in the chaotic mass. Did he just get, like, crucified? Oh my gosh. A hand begins tugging at his hair. He feels clumps tearing loose before he sees something surface above him, submerging his shadow vision. Lethargic moans and groans come from every direction like an orgy in an opium den. A sudden impact above him knocks his head into a bow. Richard feels dizzy from the unbearable pain and suffocating lack of space, as if it might pass out, but that relief would not come. Droplets of blood trickling from his scalp tickle the back of his neck. He hears a wet noise coming from a distance, and he hears it. The bodies start to compact, squeezing the rigid web of flesh tighter together, past the groans of terror and pain. Something approaches. Below him, a symphonic orchestra of percussive snaps is heard moving up through the mass. The faint air that wormed between narrow cracks of meat is now non-existent. The bottom suddenly falls from below Richard, sending him falling back with his body still locked in place. The dim light illuminates the horror beneath. Faces covered in a thick slime, lips frantically moving in silent, desperate prayer. As quick as the light pierces, it disappears as the mass of bodies tightens back into place. As his body catches, he feels his arms snap, still being pressed into place by the arrhythmic parade locked around him. He could feel the throbbing walls move in waves through the knotted limbs, sending nauseating vibrations through him. The moisture in the room turns to a faint sprilling into large bits of thick acidic slime that begin to cling to the bodies, burning against Richard's trapped legs. The bodies condense, shattering to fit into the tight space. His bones crack at a feverish pace. Richard prayed to fall unconscious. Individuals turn to an amalgam of broken flesh, indistinguishable from one body to the next. His lungs burn, desperately grasping for oxygen with their tight seal of man. The acidic slime worms through the imperceptible cracks, moving up Richard's leg with a lover's sensuality, leaving a trail of necrosis under its grip. Richard sobs as he feels his nerves rot away under the acidic slug. Pilgrimages continue, coating his body in a thick, corrosive membrane. Holy crap, what detail. Oh, I'm running out of breath here. Whew. Okay, let's keep going. Yes, the acid eats through his skin and begins to seep into his exposed musculature. He can feel individual joints and ligaments twitch against the corrosive cocoon around him. As the mass once again falls lower, Richard sees form below the blinding amber light. He can faintly see pink walls throbbing and twitching as a stream of translucent slime and people pour from the opening. He descends towards the opening, starts to close as his feet make their way through, and it clamps around his chest. Richard sticks out like a cigarette in the lip of a corpse on his upper body, still suffocating, tangled into the writhing mass grave. While his lower body hangs from the thick lips, blood and excess slime pulls around his face as vibrating lips stir in the acids in his stomach. He tries to scream, but it's stifled by the membrane around him, pulling the thick slime into his throat as if he were trapped in a plastic bag. The violent quivering of the lips stirs the acids in his stomach. As the shaking increases, he loses control, vomiting a hot stream of bile into the cellophane bubble. It presses against his face and forces itself into the nostrils. The quivering lips finally give, releasing Richard into another freefall. Though the translucent membrane, he can vaguely see the massive mouth, a void of black at its center, contrasting the reddish yellow pouring through the cloudy goop. His body broken, his vision blurred. He has no way to brace for his inevitable landing. The thickness of the membrane starts to melt away, giving Richard hope he'd soon be out from under the corrosive slime rotting away at his ligaments. The dissolving of cataractus cocoon does little to clear his vision. As it dissolves, he notices everything was clouded by a thick amber mist. He catches a faint flicker of purple lightning and burst of fire beyond. An immense heat strikes Richard as the last layers of slime evaporate off his skin. So hot, it can still be perceived under his rotten nerves. The heat continues to increase around him, activating the acids, causing explosive bursts from rotten muscle. He watches the mist drift upward while faint black shadows plummet down. Time passes agonizingly slow as his fall continues. All of Richard's features become burnt black, leaving his tendons exposed and twitching. Richard's mind goes blank. Any semblance of life before, while not forgotten, feels like a distant daydream. His body accepts the fall. He wonders if there is a bottom to be found, or if the acids and heat will consume him completely. Months seem to pass. Richard's broken bones start to heal, welding themselves in place as the heat accelerates. His body becomes stiff and rigid, his flesh charred and raw, leaking streams of blood from his wind-cracked crust. He feels a needle point penetrate the back of his head, widening as his momentum careens his head into the stake. The rigid and hardened bone of his neck splays his body as the hole in his head grows. Richard watches the spire grow between his eyes, narrowly visible in his blind spot. His hands grope the spire rising from his face, its blood-slickened ridges like a jagged gear on a clock. From around him, he hears the repetitive sounds of sheared meat. A faint plea escapes his mouth. God, what have I done to deserve this? He feels thin. Bony hands clasp around his wrist as his head slides from the stone spire. The hands bring him to a pile of writhing corpses, where he is lost within the sadistic orgy. Oh my... I'm just reading torture porn at this point. Like, what kind of purgatory hell is this? This is awful. Ugh. Steam... Alright, let's see. Part 2, Chapter 1. That's where I'm at. Alright. Yeah, all of that was just part 1. Steam plumes from massive engines as deformed men shovel steaming waste into the mouths of mechanical beasts. Massive engines on rusty stilts rise from the endless furnace, a wild assortment of gears, cogs, and pipes arranged with endless complexity. As their workers feed the machine, it releases a horrible noise, a loud mechanical roar followed by a burst of bright white steam from the tall chimney at its end. A single skull falls back out of its back, the pink of the brain inside still faintly visible. Many of the workers' eyes are molded shut, some squinting open to reveal a sliver of the whites. Despite their apparent blinding, they work with seamless efficiency. Long leashes dangle around their bony necks with just enough slack to get where they need. All bear a gaping, cog-shaped hole in their head, their left eye swallowed by one of the cog's teeth. Their features hang in a state of melt into form, their identity reduced to a goria reflect of their torment. The women are rail-thin, gaunt with jutting bones, the fat melted from their body to leave little more than a charred skeleton. The men's muscles harden around them like a shell, their faces malformed to look like a deep-fried Shar-Pei. The creatures gather to welcome the new stock. Cat of nine tails in hand, they surround the infantile flesh as it writhes helplessly on the muddy ground. Fat sizzles atop the thick, sludgy remains, the stock acquiring the overwhelming scent of bacon and sulfur. The elders begin to crack their tender flesh, blood spritzing through stripped meat. The stock's stiff bodies loosen in their frantic, futile squirming. The process of their cathartic lashing, the elders begin to drop into piles of useless, withered flesh. Within the scramble, Richard catches the faintest glint of recognition. One of the elders, her body rail-thin and decrepit, unlike the others, her eyes are fixed wide open, with the glint of faded green still visible. Yeah, that's gotta be his wife, right? That's gotta be Suzanne. Their eyes meet for a moment, and Richard watches the faded iris burst, leaking a trail of green down the white of her eye, almost as if she's shedding a tear. Ugh, sorry. She lets out one last strained blow onto him, but her decrepit body falters on itself. The whipping of stock continues till every drop of blood and fat is strangled out of their bodies. The remaining elder muzzles them into silence before they fall to, the stock leashed to another by a confluent entanglement of leather, forming a complex fractal of sigils. Oh, excuse me, sorry. As they pull at their binds in an attempt to escape, the runes displayed in the straps change, tightening their restraint and forcing their compliance. Stock rises to their feet, guided by the restraints. They're made to grab the shovels dropped by their abusers. They begin to desperately shoveling at their waist. They were prepared on, digging through their hard, petrified gore. They tear at it from smoldering ground and throw atop it with it. The young calves recognize their elders as little more than a sparse crunching of brittle bone, the mundane noise that precedes the stoking of slop they have grown accustomed to. Their connective tissue macerates to a gross amalgam of flesh and bone that tears like dry rotted cloth. Years seem to pass, years of stoking gore from smoldering ground before the stock hears the familiar sound of sheared meat. Richard's body had become ragged. His dry, rotten flesh thick on his emaciated form, pockets of steam forming in his thick wrinkles. The choking leash around his neck loosens before falling around his ankles. He approaches the set of newly spawned bodies and pulls them off their spire into the pile. He remembers the pain he felt, the pities he must do, and pities what he must do to the new stock. Shovel replaced with a whip, he rears back his hand and, with what little energy remains in his body, begins to slash the stock's bodies. His tired body fights exhaustion. With each explosive blow, he can feel his body being drained. Before he collapses, his head, half buried in sludgy remains, he awaits the coming of the shovel he once bore. The hot iron shovel presses against Richard's neck, tears at his skin, making 3 stabbing thrusts before the skin, keeping his head on, finally tears. His head has been thrown towards the mouth of the machine. The roaring engine, which faded to ambiance, now calls to him. It sounds hungry. Richard watches as the abyssal blackness of the machine nears. His head strikes the metal conveyor. He lands, and it eases him into the machine's mouth. Everything in front of him goes black, as a cog fitted perfectly for the hole in Richard's head pulls it up. The mechanical screams deafen him, echoing off the canal's metal walls. He can faintly hear the sounds of meat being liquefied to a paste beneath him, before it turns to a popping noise. The scent of port flashes through Richard's nose for a second. Then his head is thrown into the furnace below. He sees the molten ocean, his final sight before his corneas burn completely. The splash of fire seeps into his ears as he impacts the fire. The lava burns through his eardrums, solidifying his ear canal. His face melts away and regenerates in bursts. Memories flood him in his brief window of consciousness. Hold on. Man, I gotta clear my throat. Sees his wife on their wedding day, her youthful radiance still wearing the memories of adolescence, but now fully a woman. Sees her on the deathbed, her skin thin and pale, wearing all of their memories on their fold of her face. All come back in one blinding surge of consciousness before his mind returns to the dark. In his last glimpse of thought, half-formed appears to him. How much is left? Wow, that is all. I still got more to read, too. Holy moly. Alright. I'm gonna get a drink real quick. I'll be right back. Okay, alright, that's a little better. Alright, we're almost done here, I'm pretty sure. The man wakes to the tickling sensation of dirt sweeping around his eye socket. About to move, to scream, to open his eyes, but nothing changes. He tries to focus his thoughts, but they feel abstract and dreamlike, sweeping through his mind as quickly as he can from them. Where am I? The man wondered. Kevin, my son, Kevin, I remember him. I must keep that. I had a wife. Who was she? Green. Her eyes were green. I remember. Please, God, let me remember. Tendrils lightly tap onto the back of his skull, sharply worming their way through the hardened bone. Inside his skull, he could hear the light sounds of slurping. A sudden profound headache started pounding its way through his head. All he had left to do was to contemplate his thoughts, but it felt as if though the half-baked thoughts were being pulled from his head before he could finish them. He tries to remember his wife, her vibrant pale skin silhouetted in the fog. 2 bright green eyes burned through the fog and into his skull. He stood in a wedding dress. She stood in a wedding dress, waiting for him to join her. The roots dig deeper into his skull, worming their way through his brain, tearing through fibers and slurping down their liquid remains. The foggy replay of memories began to warp like deteriorated film with colors off and forms melting into the scenery. He watches as his wife's skin yellows, a small black hole growing out her torso, warping her body around its circumference before finally consuming the scene and turning it into black. The viney appendages fatten, and his skull drapes down the like wet cardboard. Blank now, the battle with time inevitably and mercifully lost. Skull begins to sag in on itself, collapsing into a useless, soggy heap. The legs slurped up the remains, and the sliver of Richard remaining was gone. Warm and comforted, surrounded by a familiar darkness, but somehow he knows this is home. He looks ahead, seeing a widening white light. A vague, abstract thought appears in his mind. Heaven? Then he feels a rubbery hand grab his tiny body, and he begins to cry. What the flip? I was so, confused of what he was going through. The dude was reborn. That's insane. I got, that is legit gave me goosebumps. All of that. He was just being, reborn into someone else. Holy crap, what, visceral, horrific detail only to be brought into new life. That is, oh my gosh, what a great story. You guys need to check out this author. I hope he keeps writing. I would love to read more of his work. Wow. I really, really liked it. I think that was the best story I read so far, honestly. But, yeah, like I said, link in the description below. Honestly, that's all I got for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it. Makes me happy seeing my community just grow ever so slightly. But thank you guys so much. Oh, excuse me. I keep burping. Alright, well, like I said before, I'm dragging on. That's about it. You all have a great Halloween. Alright, later.